I want to welcome everybody to this webinar hosted by the Atlantic Council, the Payne Institute for Public Policy at the Colorado School of Mines, and its director, my colleague, Dr. Morgan Bazilian, whom you'll hear from later, and the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, whose president is Anne Rondeau, Vice Admiral, U.S. Navy, retired. The global health pandemic has disrupted energy markets, and it's disrupted energy investments. And the pandemic has also shed light on the frailty of key supply chains, including those critical to the clean energy transition. While oil markets have been especially hard hit, critical mineral supply chains integral to clean tech manufacturing have also been affected. We have with us today a panel of experts to discuss the national security implications of the global energy transition of the United States, as well as the questions COVID-19 raises regarding U.S. preparedness for that transition. The conversation today includes the Clean Energy National Security Nexus and the critical importance of renewed U.S. leadership in the advanced energy and climate space. My thanks to all the panelists, to those behind the scenes like Zach Strauss, and to you, the web audience, who, notwithstanding the COVID environment, are taking time to attend and to expand understanding and knowledge of these critical topics. I believe in an analytical mantra of what, so what, and now what. So let's begin today's webinar to see where we are on this triad of what, so what, and now what. Greg?
Well, thanks, Dan, and appreciate that introduction. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us from wherever you are in the world. My name is Greg Duque, co-director of the Veterans Advanced Energy Project and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center. I'll be your moderator today, and I'm pleased to be joined by an esteemed panel as we discuss the U.S. national security imperative for clean energy transition and the critical importance of renewed U.S. leadership in advanced energy and climate action. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. This event is on the record. We're currently live streaming on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. We encourage you to post about what you hear today and share on social media using the hashtag ACEnergy. That's AC Energy, and by tagging us at AC Global Energy. If you'd like to participate in our conversation, we encourage you to submit your questions in the Q&A portal located at the bottom of your Zoom screen and at any time during the event. We'll incorporate them as appropriate. Please note, however, that only those directly engaging in Zoom will be able to submit questions. I'd also like to take a brief moment to highlight our upcoming virtual Veterans Advanced Energy Week, scheduled for August 10th to 13th. That's 10th to 13th. Veterans Advanced Energy Week is free, interactive, virtual learning, and networking experience dedicated to veterans, military spouses, reservists, and active duty members working to strengthen U.S. national security through careers in the advanced energy industry. On top of high-level sessions with advanced energy leaders, opportunities will be provided for participants to network with other veterans and connect with potential employers. Register online today at vetsenergyproject.org or on the Global Energy Center website. And if that interests you, you can also apply today for the Veterans Advanced Energy Fellowship, a full-year part-time career development program through the Atlantic Council designed to elevate and support veterans interested in the intersection of national security and clean energy. So let's talk about the energy national security nexus in the midst of the current global energy transition. What's happening out there behind the scenes? We are fortunate to have three panelists who are deeply experienced experts steeped at the intersection of national security and energy. Sherry Goodman served as the first Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security and was founder of the Executive Director of the Center for Naval Analysis Military Advisory Board, whose landmark reports include advanced energy and U.S. national security, certainly thematic for today's discussion. Sherry serves on the boards of the Atlantic Council and the Center for Climate and Security. And perhaps most impressively, Sherry is an advisor for our Veterans Advanced Energy Project. Vice Admiral Denny McGinn is former Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy, Installations, and Environment. Denny was also CEO of the American Council on Renewable Energy, and perhaps most impressively, Denny is also an advisor for our Veterans Advanced Energy Project. Joe Bryan, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy and now Principal at Muswell Orange, a clean energy consultancy. Joe has extensive time on Capitol Hill, where among other accomplishments, he led the U.S. Armed Service Committee investigations into cyber intrusions affecting U.S. defense contractors and defense supply chain disruptions, something we'll be talking about here in a little bit. And once again, most impressively, Joe is an advisor to our Veterans Advanced Energy Project. You notice a theme here. So let me start with Sherry. Sherry, how does your vast experience lend itself to today's discussion of the nexus of national security and climate change?
Well, thank you, Greg. First, I want to thank the great group that has brought this event together today, from the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center, led by Randy Bell, to the Naval Postgraduate School, Dan Nussbaum and his team. I note that the President, Vice Admiral retired Anne Rondeau, was a member of my military advisory board at CNA, as was Denny McGinn, Admiral McGinn, and also Morgan Brazilian, Colorado School of Mines. And you, Greg, and your leadership with Dan Mish and the Veterans Advanced Energy Project, I know we're all very pleased to support and advance that very important initiative for our veterans. So, okay, the question you ask, the prior assumptions we've had the last quarter century about climate and energy have proven to be incorrect, because we took for many years climate for granted. In other words, we thought it was stationary. We thought that the past would predict the future. And we've learned now, we've known for well over a decade, that climate change is a threat multiplier, and that indeed we can't rely on the past to predict the future environmental, weather, meteorological, or other operating conditions for our forces. Okay, so that's one major shift we've made, and that climate directly affects our national security and is connected to energy. In energy, and the Department of Defense and our military use a vast amount of energy. They're the largest single energy user in the United States, although it's still a small percent of overall energy use. But again, for most of our military's history, we assumed that energy would be there when you needed it. In fact, even in defense budgeting, we always added the cost of fuel as an add-on. It wasn't baked into the way the budget was built. And we didn't play energy in logistics war games until maybe the last 10 or so years. So we've learned that we can't take energy for granted either, and that and that it's not unlimited either in cost or consequence. High prices have affected our military budget, but it's also put our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines at risk when they're convoying fuel to the front, which is why DoD has been leading by example in clean energy innovation for the last decade or so, in order to improve military performance and readiness of our forces and reduce cost and lead us into the next generation of energy. And I think that's going to be incredibly important for the military to lead by example in energy innovation, primarily the subject of our discussion today.
Thank you very much, Sherry. We're going to get to your point about this being an inflection point as we look at climate change as a threat multiplier here in a little bit. Denny, as former Assistant Secretary of the Navy, why does this transition to advanced energy matter to the Department of Defense and the military services? Why should we care about this?
Well, thanks, Greg. Did you mention that I'm a member of the Veterans Advanced Energy Advisory Program Advisory Board?
I might have mentioned that, yeah, but thank you for reminding me.
Well, great. Well, as Sherry has said, energy in all forms is essential to military operations, our military power as a nation. I think in a larger context, our energy security as a nation, our economic security, our environmental security all underpin our overall national security and quality of life. You can't really do much in any one of those areas without affecting the others. So if we were to continue down the road of business as usual with 100% reliance effectively, or overwhelming percentage of reliance on fossil fuel, the implications for both our economic security and especially our environmental security are enormous. So in the Navy, in the Department of Defense, we recognized that we needed to diversify our energy supply, and we needed to do it in a way that gave us choices so that we could match the form of energy that was available to the mission. All of our energy initiatives need to ultimately have a positive effect on the efficiency and the effectiveness of our military missions, and that's the criterion by which we judge our investments in energy. And oh, by the way, as a very, very technology-driven organization, the Department of Defense and all of the military services need to be leading with the best, whether it's greater energy density for batteries in UAVs or other unmanned systems, or whether it's the ability to break those vulnerable logistics, oil convoy supply chains that Sherry mentioned, and be able to be as self-sustaining as possible at the forward edge and forward operating bases. So we recognize that energy is absolutely necessary, that business as usual is not a very viable path, and we want to not just observe on the sideline as other nations develop better energy solutions, but rather to actually lead it.
Danny, thank you very much for that answer. You covered a lot of ground there, and one of the points that you mentioned was the security of global supply chain as it relates to energy, which is something that our next panelist, Joe Bryan, is an expert on and has testified extensively on Capitol Hill and written about as well for the Global Energy Center. So, Joe, let me turn to you as former Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy. What has COVID taught us about the national and economic security risk of global supply chain interruptions as they relate to energy?
Well, thanks, Greg. And thanks again to the Atlantic Council and the Payne School and NPS for putting this panel together, and you, Greg, for your leadership on this stuff. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be on the panel with Sherry and my old boss, Denny. I'm not as wardrobe gifted as he is, but at least I can be here. So I think what's become obvious to all of us over the past several months is that the United States has some really critical vulnerabilities when it comes to supply chains for key materials. I mean, the most obvious example has been personal protective equipment for our medical workers and people on the front lines against the pandemic. That's been in the news every day. But what the pandemic has also exposed is the vulnerabilities in supply chains for key materials that are essential to the energy transition. And just for one example, cobalt, which most folks know is a key input to lithium-ion batteries, which are a fundamental building block of the transition to electrification and transportation, as well as to some of our renewable integration onto the grid. Cobalt's majority of cobalt comes from Democratic Republic of Congo, and a lot of it's shipped out of South Africa through the port of Durban. Well, the COVID shut down the port of Durban for a period of time, interrupting the supplies of cobalt to the rest of the world. Now, we may not have felt that in the moment, but as this transition accelerates and as batteries become fundamental to key industries in the United States, like our auto industry, like our grid, and like our military platforms, which already to a great extent rely on battery storage for significant capabilities, that could be a very serious problem. Now this time, I think it was a pandemic which interrupted the supply of materials, but it could have been a material shortage. It could have been a trade dispute, or it could have been a military conflict, which interrupted the supply of key materials from places in the world that we don't have easy access to. And the high level point here is also that, we're in a very weak position when we look to some of our competitors. China dominates, for example, on the lithium-ion battery supply chain. China dominates that supply chain. Everywhere from minerals extraction to chemicals processing to anode cathode production and battery production. And so we're in a very weak position right now, and it doesn't. Our current position doesn't bode well for us if we stay there for our future position geopolitically, or the support of key platforms that we're going to need to project military strength into the future.
Joe, that's a great answer. Let me probe just a little bit more deeply on the lithium ion battery problem. As you mentioned, heavily dependent upon China, both in terms of their control of the mine, the entire supply chain, right? Mining, manufacturing. If you were in charge, where do we apply resources? How do we, given the fact that lithium ion batteries are so fundamental, as you point out, not only economic security, but national security with regard to Department of Defense use, where do we collectively, United States, start applying resources in order to regain some control of this lithium ion battery supply chain?
Well, thanks, Dan. Thanks for putting me in charge, Greg. It's a daunting responsibility. So what I would say is fundamentally we have to first begin by recognizing reality. The transition to electrification of transportation is well underway. And rather than fight that trend, that transition, we need to endorse it wholeheartedly. I mean, countries around the world have made commitments to phase out the internal combustion engine and to phase in significant numbers of electric vehicles over the next decade. We need to be at the table. We need to be part of that transition, because if we decide to stay on the sidelines as we have to date, we are going to find ourselves in a very difficult position. So one, I would commit to that transition, an aggressive transition, and then I would commit to being involved in all the negotiations and discussions that are happening around global investment. Most folks are familiar with Tesla's Gigafactory out in Nevada. What a lot of folks don't know is there are about, I think, 140 or so megafactories under construction or completed and in operation globally today, and only about 6 or 8 of those are in the United States. The overwhelming majority are in China and Asia, and Europe is rapidly catching up. So we need to be at the table attracting those investments to the United States to shore up our key strategic industry with the auto industry for the future, and also make sure that we have access to the materials and supplies we're going to need to support our national security platforms. So I think the first step is recognizing that recognizing reality, and from there we make a number of decisions about resources.
That's
Greg,
great.
if I could make a comment, Joe has it exactly right. He's doing a great job since you put him in charge. I'd like to make an analogy. If you think back to the 20th century and what petroleum did for the United States in terms of making us a global power and our quality of life and everything, we needed crude oil. Some of it was domestic, but a lot of it increasingly became imported. But we also needed refineries and the ability to turn that crude into useful products for our military, for our economy, for our way of life. These gigafactories effectively are like those oil refineries. We need to watch the supply chains for raw materials like cobalt, like Joe mentioned, but we also have to have the ability domestically and in a diversified way to turn those raw materials into usable products for our military and especially for our economy. And that electrification that Joe pointed out is absolutely essential.
Denny, you've reminded me of our old friend Alfred Thayer Mahan and his strategy of securing advanced coaling stations for the U.S. Navy. And maybe these gigafactories are today's equivalent of these advanced coaling stations for our military and our commerce.
Exactly.
Yeah. Um, for the audience, we have a panel ready to mix it up. So please do submit your questions in the Zoom portal, and we'll take them as we go along here. Sherry, you managed. You were the first. Deputy Undersecretary for Environmental Security. You shaped that Department of Defense in many respects in terms of environmental security, and made great advances that we appreciate today. I mean, indeed, at the antecedents of something that Denny and Joe worked on, the Great Green Fleet. Why is moving to clean energy so important from a national security perspective, and how far do we have to go in Department of Defense energy?
Well, thank you, Greg. And let me just make five quick points on that. First, we recognized back in the 90s, and it's true today too, that American global leadership depends on our leadership in these areas. We recognized that we needed to integrate environmental leadership into our global and national security leadership in the 90s. And now, our competitive advantage, as Joe and Denny have explained in detail, depends on recognizing the elements of the energy transition where the world is already in, leading some of the technology and understanding those supply chains that we need either to have in the US or we need to have assured supply. So, we have many supply chain risks. Joe just talked about some of them. So the second point is we've got to manage the supply chain. And among the risks we face in the climate era are the risks of floods and other extreme weather disruptions to the supply chains, either around the world or in our own country, to which we are increasingly vulnerable, whether it's hurricanes in the Gulf disrupting the Houston ship channel and the oil supply chain, or whether it's floods in India and Pakistan and in China, where many of our rare earth and critical energy electronic components come from. So that's a second. We've got to understand the risk to the supply chain and manage those. Third, we've got to lead by innovation. And we've been doing that. We do that in defense technology. That's what we've done with creating GPS and the internet. And now is the time, and the CNA Military Advisory Board has written about this numerous times, that we need to lead in these new in the energy transition. I note that the recently passed Senate National Defense Authorization Act again include, and as well as the House bill, both bills include a number of provisions to advance energy innovation by the Department of Defense, either through the Environmental Security Technology Certification Program we created in the 1990s, other programs, and this year in a collaborative program with ARPA-E. So that's, I think, a very good sign. Congress gets it, wants DOD to lead, whether it's on microgrids, reducing supply chain risk, battery storage, which is going to be increasingly essential. Third, the climate risk is increasingly affecting both our national security and our military readiness. That's something we need to address, and it needs to be an integral part of our national security strategy. And then finally, the resilience of supply of energy is just critically important for both our bases and our operating forces. And there are at least half a dozen, if not more, provisions in the recently passed defense bills requiring DOD to better address the energy resilience of its for its supply.
Sure. Let me touch again on a point you made about the national security implication of climate change as it relates to our domestic installations. And, just about a year and a half ago, wasn't it, maybe last hurricane season, two hurricane seasons ago, Tyndall Air Force Base, Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, Offutt Air Force Base, all three got schwacked pretty good by climate disruptions to the tunes of somewhere between 3.5 and $5 billion that Congress is still trying to find money to pay for, to have them rebuilt. F-22 hangars at Tyndall getting waxed and so forth. Not good for national security. What can we be doing from a Defense Department perspective in order to harden these key critical strategic installations to the inevitable climate disruptions?
Well, Greg, we need to climate proof our military infrastructure. We were learning the hard way now through the damage done at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, as you noted, Lejeune in North Carolina, Offutt in Nebraska, and other installations, that we're going to pay more later if we don't make the right investments now. So we need to use the proper FEMA flood standards that recognize that what we thought were 100-year floods often occur now at 1 and 5 year intervals, that extreme weather events produce now storms with higher winds than many of our hangars are rated for. That was part of the problem at Tyndall. So we need to climate proof and update our Uniform Facility Code, the standards that we use to build our infrastructure that's based on realistic climate standards. That's one. We need essentially, we need an arsenal of resilience now. Arsenal of resilience tools in order to climate proof our installations. And this will also affect our military operations and our ability to deploy forces as we experience more Black Flag days from higher extreme temperatures. And then we also have to be able to do more black start, of our installations when we expect that there could be power outages, either from weather, climate events, cyber attacks, terrorist attacks, and the like. And I note again, the defense bills also impose on DoD many requirements now to be able to do black start across critical mission activities.
That's a great answer. Thank you.
I think Sherry's got it exactly right, Greg. Resilience is absolutely key. These installations for all of the services are effectively the launch pads from which we launch our military capabilities downrange to deal with critical national security interests all around the world. So when you lose a base like Lejeune for a couple of years without full capability because of Hurricane Florence, for example, that really has a cost, not just in the billions of dollars to rebuild, but a cost to our national security. There are a lot of good, I like the term climate proofing. There are a lot of good practical things that we can do. First of all, recognizing where we have potential problems. I can't find any climatologist that will tell me, give me a guarantee that we won't have any hurricanes on the Gulf Coast or Atlantic seaboard for the next 10 years. They're going to be there. It's just a matter of how big and when. But when you do things like, if you have an installation in a FEMA floodplain, job one, don't put the computer servers in the basement. Maybe you ought to just think about putting them someplace else. Think about your emergency energy supply. Can you suffer a loss of grid power and still keep the mission going through a microgrid or distributed energy resources? So those are just a couple of thoughts, but recognizing these bases are vulnerable and doing something about it. And it's not just flooding and hurricanes, it's wildfires in the West and other places.
Denny, that's a great lead in to, we're starting to get some excellent questions flowing in to your point about microgrids and their role within in supporting energy security for our military installations. And the question is, would the development and implementation of nuclear microreactors, so a sourcing of that microgrid potentially domestic or overseas, be an incremental or groundbreaking advancement for national security? And how would this change the supply chain? Where would these devices be most useful? You want to take a first shot at that, Danny?
Sure.
Thank you.
I don't think it would be exactly game changing. It could be helpful if viewed as part of a portfolio, an expanded and diverse portfolio of energy generation that could be used in various scenarios. Clearly, one of the big concerns about nuclear power is the security of it. And I'm not talking about 3 Mile Island or Fukushima Daiichi or anything like that. I'm talking about even for micro reactors. We really, really need to understand how they can be reliable and how they can be ruggedized and deployed where and when you need them. The other thing, of course, is the cost. They're not at the Walmart yet, or Home Depot or Lowe's, so we've got to develop them in conjunction and partnership with the private industry, and that costs a lot of money. And as we know, especially our folks in the national security establishment know, there's a lot of competition for every dollar, every RDT&E dollar. So those are just a couple of considerations, but we should absolutely look at them, small nuclear reactors, small modular reactors, micro reactors, as a potential addition, and then just do the business case, cost, benefit, and risks to push those forward to actual capability.
Thank you.
Greg,
Yeah,
I'll add 2 cents on. Oh, you go ahead, sir.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I think micro nuclear reactors or small modular do have a place, particularly in remote bases. And I think that the Department of Defense can be part of a broader national strategy to revitalize the nuclear energy industry. There's no question that nuclear is going to be a key part of decarbonizing our energy future, and we should be part of that game. It can't all be done through DoD, but DoD can be part of a larger national strategy, and it can also support activity, particularly at remote bases.
So, Greg, just to add my 2 cents, I have a slightly different view maybe than my friends and colleagues. I'm a little bit skeptical on microreactors for a couple of reasons. One, I think we don't. Our recent track record of licensing and operating reactors in the new reactors in the United States is not good. I don't know the last time we've built a new reactor in the United States. Cost that Denny refers to, I totally agree with him on cost. We haven't nailed that down yet. And then I'm challenged to think about the deployment of small nuclear reactors into conflict zones. I have a hard time seeing how that works. It sounds incredibly complicated and complex to me. It implicates allies and their views, and it obviously, as Denny would say, the enemy gets a vote on all that stuff. So I am not bullish on microreactors, but open-minded.
Okay, thank you for those excellent answers. Let's turn our attention now to securing these key critical supply chains, energy and otherwise, with an excellent question here. What is the role of maritime security in the facilitation of international energy trade? How does clean energy transition enhance or reduce tensions in the Middle East with U.S. adversaries like Iran or allies like Israel? Denny, you want to lead off on that one again?
Sure. Well, you referred earlier, Greg, to Alfred Thayer Mahan, and the oceans are still the avenues of commerce and security and quality of life. So absolutely essential to have maritime security. And it doesn't have to be done entirely by the United States. It isn't now. We need to continue to grow and strengthen our alliances in various regions of the world so that everybody has a certain amount of the burden to share to maintain that, because the benefits accrue to everybody, every trading nation in the world, and we need to hold those alliances very, very close and strengthen them.
Sherry, Joe, you want to throw in on that?
I would only say, Greg, that I think Denny's point on engagement is really a critical one here. One of the challenges we've had in more recently is our engagement hasn't been what I think it ought to be on the issue of the energy transition. I think that, for example, on minerals, we have to recognize that that we don't have all the minerals in the United States that we might need to facilitate this transition, but we do have alliances, and we can build relationships that allow us to have access to the kind of things that we might need, and we need to engage on that. We need to aggressively engage on that. So I think Denny's point on our alliances being essential to the transition, both from a commercial standpoint in the United States, but from a national security standpoint of making sure that we are aligned with the folks who are going to be with us along the way.
Thanks, Joe. Sherry?
Greg,
Mhm.
I'd also observed that many of our key allies in the Middle East are also part of the clean energy transition. Even the major fossil fuel producers like Saudi and the Emirates are also trying to develop and are working hard on clean energy technologies, a variety of types. And so we have an opportunity to work with them so that they can become more resilient and therefore more secure and improve Middle East security by diversifying their own energy and economic sectors. So the more advanced ones are doing that. And the same is true also with Israel. And, I put water in here. Water is very scarce, of course, in the Middle East. Israel, Emirates, and others are leading on desalination technologies. And that has many opportunities. We're going to need a lot more water in many parts of the world. And so we need to be mindful of water shortages and water scarcities as well.
Greg,
Yeah.
there's a great quote attributed to a former Saudi oil minister who said, "We must remember that the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones, and the oil age is not going to end because we run out of oil. It's going to be because there are other technologies, other means of producing electricity and motion and transportation and heat, and that's what this transition to clean, sustainable energy is all about. The benefits accrue in terms of it's a diverse portfolio. It is one that is sustainable from a climate standpoint, as well as local and regional environmental quality. And I think that, as Sherry rightly points out, those who are the big players in supplying oil recognize this, and they are in the business of diversifying for a whole bunch of very, very valid reasons.
Well, we learned that at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Forum last year, didn't we, at Abu Dhabi, where the Saudi oil minister was more interested in advanced energy than he was in petro products. So, okay, let's turn our attention back to microgrids and as it relates to energy security, with the question: should all military bases in the U.S. be able to operate independently off the grid in case power supply from local utilities is disrupted due to weather, physical, or cyber attacks? Joe, you want to take a first stab at that one?
Sure. So I wouldn't start by saying they all need to operate. Every mission on every installation needs to operate independent of the grid. I think it's probably it's an expensive and challenging thing to even get one base to operate in that way. I think the threats are real. The cyber threat's real. The weather threat's obvious. And I think critical missions are very vulnerable, which is I think we've seen as the Department of Defense and the services have gone out and done some Black Star exercises to demonstrate how critical missions can either stay up and running or come back in the event of an outage. So I would say it's really important as a first order business to identify those key missions on key installations that we need to not be vulnerable to these kind of things, that we need the most resilience for, and that we target those specifically. Our end goal, getting to military installations that are all resilient from weather and cyber attacks and can all maintain all their missions in the event of a grid outage. I mean, I think that's an ideal end state, but in the near term, I think we really need to focus on key missions at key installations and get them going as soon as possible, because the weather and our adversaries aren't waiting.
Right.
One of the things that is essential to this idea of resilience for installations is the need to partner with the private sector, partner with utilities, to partner with energy firms, technology producers, and as Joe says, getting 24/7, 365 independent islanded installation energy security is not a very affordable proposition, but we've got to recognize that this clean energy transition is offering us opportunities that we did not have even as recently as 5 years ago in terms of storage with batteries, pump storage in some cases, in terms of the kinds, the form factors and capacities of solar and wind power. So, and then of course, the addition of tremendous amount of information technology, micro sensors, micro control devices that can control the demand and really manage the demand to a level of granularity that will keep the essential missions going with whatever power you do have available at a given time.
Yeah, well, I'll just observe on that particular point that the Senate Defense Authorization Bill just passed has a provision which requires that by the end of fiscal year 30, 100% of DoD critical loads, so that's not all loads, but what DoD defines as critical loads have a minimum level of availability of 99.9% per fiscal year. So that's going to be a pretty, if that withstands conference and that becomes law, that's going to become an energy performance standard for the Department of Defense.
And Sherry, it's a great point, and it reinforces this idea of it has to be a partnership with the private sector. To the extent that utilities are making investments in making more reliable, resilient, robust their grids, the possibilities of failure to supply energy to that installation goes down. So what things that are happening out in the West, for example, as a result of lessons learned from forest fires and how you can do a better job at maintaining and preventing damage to transmission lines, et cetera. So this is not just the military in a stovepipe doing something that is really good for them. They want to get that benefit in a mutually beneficial way, win-win outcomes with utilities.
Hey, Greg, one thing that that we haven't really touched on, but which is a really fundamental building block of resilience on military installations and anywhere is energy efficiency. So the cheapest and best energy is the kilowatt hour you don't use, right? So avoiding the use of energy and avoiding the capital requirements that come with generation or even distributed generation by saving energy and by operating efficiently, that is really the most important and basic building block of anything we do on our installations. And DoD has done a great job over the years in understanding that and actually pursuing that in partnership, like Denny says, with our private sector partners.
And to Joe's point, it's not just installations. Think about operational energy efficiency. To the extent that we have ships that can go further and stay out in an area of operations longer on a tank gas, or airplanes that increase their payload or their endurance or their range because they are inherently more efficient from a technology standpoint, or they are operated in a much more efficient way. That is directly beneficial to our military capabilities. So it's operational efficiency as well as installation efficiency.
So let me add on that point, because I see one of the questions on efficiency goes to the energy savings performance contracts and whether there are opportunities for improvement in that particular vehicle. And I remember executing those in the 90s. And, they're designed, the way they're designed now, they work well at capturing the low-hanging fruit that you might have in an installation, large load that could become more efficient. They're less good at capturing smaller savings, and those smaller savings can accumulate. So I think there are ways to better incentivize and shape the energy savings performance contract vehicle and structure to be able to wring more efficiency out of the system. Because yes, that's the best form of fuel, is the efficient one, the dollar not spent.
Yeah, the negawatts.
Just as a point of reference, our partner Naval Postgraduate School Center for Infrastructure Defense has enormous knowledge and case studies on resilience at nps.edu/CID. Let me now talk about the transformation, and we have a question about the Energy Act. Thoughts on the impact for Energy Act to channel investments to support transformative energy technology and increase public-private partnerships? What are the implications of this for improving U.S. standing in a clean energy transition. Sherry, you want to take a first shot at that one?
Okay, I'm not sure I'm familiar with the particular vehicle. In general, I do support increasing use and ease of use of public-private partnerships. That's how we've been able to be a technology leader in defense over many decades. And while there are provisions across that apply to many different agencies that allow for public-private partnerships, sometimes they're still fairly cumbersome to put in place. And so I think we should be reaching out more. We also have to help close the valley of death that exists between the technology, the research and development that's done in the laboratory, the technology demonstration, and the actual operational use. Sometimes the challenge is that the investments needed for either energy or climate proofing or this arsenal of resilience tools we're talking about, the pull isn't there, even after it gets developed out of maybe a DoD supported program like the Energy Security Technology Certification Program or the Strategic Environmental Research and Development Program or other service programs. Still, someone in a base command or someone in an installation management level or someone at the operational command has to say, I want to use this, in my next weapon system or my next construction project. And so that valley of death and requirements also has to get overcome. It's a multi-step process.
Greg, I think, one of the challenges we have in Congress as we talk about legislation and an energy bills, we pass a defense bill every year, but getting any major legislation otherwise passed is exceptionally challenging in our current political environment. That includes energy legislation. I know that when it comes to thinking about the transition to electrification of transportation and the national priority that ought to be, and the fact that ought to be included not only in executive action priorities, but also in legislative action priorities. That's something Senator Murkowski, Senator Manchin have worked very hard on their committee, on ENR, on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. But the level of commitment that's being made by our competitors, and this isn't just China, but it's Europe, who recognizes the importance of taking advantage of this energy transition from an economic and national security standpoint, not making their key auto industry vulnerable. I mean, the European Union has put just last December, for example, in one tranche, put about $3.5 billion into the lithium-ion supply chain, a public investment in that supply chain, because they understand that it's in the EU's interest to have an active and healthy auto industry, and an auto industry that's transitioning to electrification. And so I think there's a key role for executive branch action, but there's also a key role for the Congress to play here. And there needs to be a public commitment both in policy and in dollars to make sure that we don't find ourselves at the back of the line when this energy transition continues to accelerate. So the Congress has a role to play here.
Greg, there's another aspect to this energy transition from a technology standpoint that I just want to highlight for our audience, and that is hydrogen. The Olympics in Tokyo, hopefully to be held in a safe, healthy environment next year, Olympic Village is going to be entirely powered, and all the transportation inside that Olympic Village, by hydrogen. There's a great deal of work that's being done in Europe and some in the United States, and of course in Japan, on bringing hydrogen in terms of how do you get what is called green hydrogen from a very, very sustainable electrolysis process. How do you get it to where it can provide either heat or power generation or transportation in a fuel cell? So I would encourage our audience, especially those folks involved in national security, take a good look at the hydrogen aspect. It isn't the silver bullet, but once again, it is a key part of a future portfolio of sustainable energy.
Let me follow that up, Denny, by asking how far away are we from using hydrogen or other sources, biofuels, alternatives for naval vessels, airplanes, military equipment?
I would say pretty far, non-specific, but we need to start. We need to continue the work. We've done a lot of work in the past administration on the biofuel additions. Great Green Fleet was mentioned earlier, and that work needs to continue. I noted that Airbus just made an announcement at the beginning of this week that they are going to look to see if they can power airliners with hydrogen, starting serious work on it in about 5 years. So that is a major announcement, and I'm sure it's going to be investigated by everybody that's involved in aircraft manufacture, engine manufacturing as well.
So Greg, one of the couple of things that are happening in the services, as folks probably know, are, I mean, the electrification trend in the commercial sector is obviously recognized as the Department of Defense as something that is happening. The Army has publicly discussed interest in an all-electric brigade combat team in the future. The Navy has a large electric ships office. Those platforms and those capabilities that are going to be enabled by electrification are going to be based on things like lithium-ion batteries and advanced battery technologies, and even in the future, as those systems deploy, are going to be fueled by renewable energy systems that maybe don't have to rely on logistics support in the same way that we have now. And so these things that are happening in the commercial sector have an impact on our military. We just need to recognize the inevitability and the scale and pace of this transition and buy in.
Morgan Bazillion offers that for those interested, the NPS paper, Energy and the Military, Convergence of Security, Economic, and Environmental Decision-Making, is available at, Morgan will cover that when he finishes up, because I can't quite read it. Okay.
Okay, Greg, before we run out of time, can I jump in here on just a couple of questions I see we've gotten in the chat that I think are important. And one is about the withdrawal from the U.S. planned withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, intensifying its talks with China on climate change, and how do we maintain a united transatlantic front with China, vis-a-vis China, with the emerging alliance between the EU and China. And this is a really, really important point, because we've talked about not only is the U.S. potentially overly dependent on China for its energy supply chain, but the EU could become even more dependent now without the U.S. as a reliable partner. So this underscores the importance of allies and partnerships of the U.S. getting back in the game, restoring its relationships with our key allies and partners, leading on climate, getting back into Paris, and also leading on the energy transition and the energy supply chain for electrification, because we know this is very important to our key EU allies.
They're here, absolutely essential. Couldn't agree more, Sherry.
Batteries, that another questioner has a question on battery storage technology is a key barrier preventing electric vehicles. And so I wrote that we need to do more on that. DOD can't be the total solution on that, but it can certainly, again, lead by example. And there is a provision, again, in the defense bills this year to require DOD to start such an effort on energy storage demonstration initiative with ARPA-E and the DOD Environmental Technology Certification Program. That's probably a small start. Maybe we need bigger effort here.
Denny, you have an opinion on that, U.S. withdrawing from the world and the implications for energy security?
Absolutely. We need to get back to the game. We need to be at the front of the parade, if you will, towards this new energy economy, this new energy world. Big mistakes made by getting out of the Paris Accord. We're not out officially. We still have a chance to get back in. And withdrawing from the agreement on Iran, nuclear weapons. The list goes on, but we need to get back in there technologically, economically, and in a policy sense, politically.
So Greg, just to offer one example in support of that.
Yeah.
you know, there was in December of last year, there was an agreement announced between BMW, the German government, the Chinese government, and CATL, a large Chinese battery manufacturer. And the German government, I'm sorry, BMW agreed to buy, I think it's about $8 billion in batteries from CATL. And part of that agreement is that CATL will be building a battery manufacturing facility in Germany. And the German government, the Chinese government, and those two commercial actors were both at the table for that. These are the scale and the of kind of deals that are being made internationally that are going to reshape geopolitics as we accelerate through this energy transition. The United States needs to be part of this. We need to be at the table, not just because it's good for the environment, which it is, but because it's good for the United States national security and it's good for our military. And backing out of Paris and backing out of productive discussions with our allies on things that are important to them and to us is a mistake.
I would really encourage everybody to take a look at China's Belt and Road global engagement strategy. It has the potential to do a tremendous amount of good if done right, but so far it hasn't been done right because it's effectively proliferating coal-fired energy in a lot of developing countries instead of something that's more sustainable and, oh, by the way, in the long run, much more affordable.
Well, I think we're getting tight on time here. I'd like to thank our panelists who have been excellent, and as well as our audience for the terrific questions that you've been posing. And now turn it over to Morgan Bazilian for closing remarks.
Thanks very much, Greg. And my name is Morgan Bazilian. I'm a professor and director of the Payne Institute for Public Policy at the Colorado School of Mines. Today's event continues our partnerships with both the Naval Postgraduate School and the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center. I'm grateful to both organizations for their ongoing partnership. At the Payne Institute, we've published considerable research on the topics covered today, including military leadership and energy security, innovation, and resilience. I have the privilege of closing the event today by saying thank you to our audience for joining us, and thanks to all our world-class panelists for sharing their perspectives. You heard today from the best in the business on these topics, and I think that should have been clear. I'd also like to thank Brianna Pistone, Zach Strauss, and Roger Morales for making the event run so smoothly today from the Atlantic Council. If you'd like to re-watch the event or share the live stream with a colleague, you can access it on the Atlantic Council's website or YouTube channels. For more clean energy and national security content, do make sure to mark your calendars and register for the Veterans Advanced Energy Week, which is taking place virtually from August 10th to the 13th. Several of us on the call are on the advisory board for that terrific organization, and it's sure to be an amazing event. So thank you again for joining us today, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Cheers.